My round 6 play of the day from the Tal Memorial is the game Anand against Nakamura. Anand, of course, lost very badly against Carlsen yesterday. Could he stabilise things? Nakamura leading the tournament, looking to press. Now, Anand with the white pieces played the Spanish. Nakamura selected this so-called Smyslov variation with g6. Well, not that common, but also not too unorthodox. Not a bad opening. Now, here's an interesting moment. I think this is very good preparation from Nakamura. He wants to try to unbalance the position, and I think he had an inkling that Anand wouldn't play the more orthodox bishop a4, but I think he knew that Anand would love to give up bishop for knight. And this is exactly what Nakamura wants, because he's got an unbalanced position now. He's got two bishops. Now, white does have the centre, but black can try and use these bishops to hit out at white's centre. I think h3 is a good move to prevent bishop g4, which would put a lot of pressure on the d-pawn. But there is a downside to playing h3, and we'll see in a second. Nakamura comes up with a very ambitious plan indeed. h6, I think, is a very clever idea. g5 with the idea knight g6 and g4, and suddenly you can see that because of this pawn move h3, black has something to bite on the king side. Now, it might seem a bit risky to move the pawn up in front of the king, but because black is packing his king side with minor pieces, in fact he's safe enough. So Anand continued with rook d1, supporting the d-pawn. b6, that allows the bishop on c8 to move, because of course there was pressure from the queen. Okay, these all look pretty standard moves. Knight g6, just getting ready for g4. Now I think Anand really has to play d5 now, otherwise black will play g4 and there's too much pressure. So I think this is a good move. And if this is taken, then white has a real initiative through the middle of the board. So c5, I think it's good to try and keep things closed. Also, c5 controls d4, preventing knight d4 or bishop d4. Good move. Knight b5, preparing to play d6, and black has to react quickly here. So g4 again, and now white has this centre, but black is kind of nibbling away at the edges. And these, I like these two bishops. You know, this pin is very annoying indeed. So already a threat to play bishop takes knight. So therefore, bishop d2, so that the queen defends the knight. Now, I mean, I think there are lots of moves here. Rook e8, knight e5 possible, but queen d7 from Nakamura is very nice. Connects the rooks, prepares to play c6 to break down the centre. I think already black has enough counterplay to offset these pawns. I think Anand should protect that e-pawn and get out of this pin here. And I think things aren't so bad for him. But instead Anand played rook c1, which, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to do much. c6 was played, and now it seems to me that black really is doing very well, and Anand has to be very careful. The e-pawn is threatened, and if this is defended, then rook e8 with more pressure on the e-pawn. And, well, if the queen comes across, the problem is that bishop takes b2 wins a pawn. So Anand played bishop c3, but this is a compromise because it allows black to shatter white's kingside pawns, and this knight is just perfectly placed looking at these weakened squares here. So Anand has to be terribly careful in this position. Nakamura could already play knight f4 with a deadly threat of queen g6, and I think Anand would have to give up the exchange here with something like this to drive away the knight. Now, it's possible that white has enough for the exchange here, but it just shows you that Anand is already kind of under pressure. So that was an option for Nakamura, but instead he played, well, very responsibly, you could say, rook d8. And it's interesting to see how he manages to exploit Anand's weaknesses a bit later on. So Anand very keen to swap pieces because otherwise his king could come under fire. And rook d7 from Nakamura, wanted to keep control, and after this exchange, Anand hasn't got much better. Then the queen is looking down the d-file, but also looking in this direction as well. So therefore, queen d5 from Anand, played quite quickly. Probably bishop takes g7 is better, but white is under pressure here. You can see this knight, which kind of is on a very nice square, but it's miles away from the king side, miles away from these kind of crucial squares on d5 and f5. So Anand played queen d5, hoping for salvation in the endgame, but this is a fascinating position. I mean, I don't know whether Anand can hold this, but he's really on the edge here. There are some amazing variations. Now, knight to f3 check is possible, but Nakamura played king f8. It's a very clever move indeed. He's seeking to dominate that knight. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here. So white has lots of alternatives. What about king g2? It looks like the most obvious move. Well, in fact, after this move, I think white is in desperate trouble. For example, king g3, we take the a-pawn, and this king controls the d-pawn, and white's king is tied to defending against the h-pawn. Must be winning. So after knight d3, what about knight c8? Well, this is very, very good for black, and this is an interesting motif that black actually traps this knight, and black is simply winning here. You know, after this knight exchange, the king has to take care of the pawn, and this one goes through, so winning for black. What else do we have? We have king f1. Now, here is a brilliant move. Now, I must confess, I had some silicon assistance with this move, but this is beautiful. It's a beautiful move. If pawn takes, then this should be good for black. But the idea is that if knight takes, you play knight c4. This knight, again, it's to do with controlling this knight. This knight is actually trapped. And this is such a beautiful square. So here's the idea. Now if, well, let me play the main variation. King d3, then you check, take the pawn, and here, well, with basically these two rook's pawns, black must be winning this position. Or if f4, then you push, distract the king, and then we come over and take the a-pawn again. Very similar. But what a classy move, b5. I love that. What else do we have? f4. Again, the knight comes in, and here's a nice variation. The king comes across, and once again, this knight is trapped. Dreadful position. And this should be winning for black. It's quite extraordinary. Now in the game, Anand chose king h2, and once again, black managed to trap this knight. In this position, the knight is obviously running out of squares, so Anand played f4. Very nice maneuver, so the knight continues to control c4. The knight is trapped. A check. The only way to save the knight is d6. Now we don't take it because the d-pawn goes through, but king c6 simply picks this up, and well, black isn't any material up yet, but the king is too strong, and this pawn will eventually tell. It's like an outside passed pawn, but the black's king is basically too active, and Anand could find nothing better than this. Well, of course, we have to take care of this pawn. But now, yeah, black threatens just to push the c-pawn, and that's that. And there's nothing better for white than to bring the knight back. And in this position, Anand resigned. Well, let me go through just one variation. Basically, we're going to distract the king with this h-pawn and then move over. So, for example, this is rather typical. If well, king takes pawn, then the king comes in, and well, we just head over and queen the c-pawn. The king is too late to get here. Black gets there first. And what else do we have? After h4 check, if the king comes back, oh, excuse me, if the king comes back, then king f4. Well, you can even give this one up because while white's king goes over the c-pawn, this one wins. So, well, black gets there eventually. I mean, these are two fairly typical variations. A really impressive game from Nakamura, who now leads the tournament on his own with 4.5 out of 6. Gelfand drew with Carlsen today, so Gelfand has 4. Mamedyarov drew, he has 3.5. Carlsen drew with Gelfand, he has 3.5. And at the bottom of the tournament, would you believe it, Morozevich, Anand and Kramnik on 2 points. It's the rest day tomorrow in the Tal Memorial. I'll be giving a power play show live on playchess.com at 2000 hours Central European time, so do join me for that. I'll be looking at some Carlsen endgames among other things. Unfortunately, this is going to be my last report from the Tal Memorial. I'm busy with other things over the next few days. But when I return, I'll perhaps do a roundup show, perhaps next week, to fill you in on some of the action. So thanks very much for watching.